Welcome to our Fertility Network National Fertility Awareness Week webinar on mental health. Today we're joined by Angela Pericleous-Smith from BICA, the British Infertility Counselling Association, who's going to talk to us a bit about mental health and fertility. Angela, I wanted to start by asking you, there is still a bit of a stigma around mental health, isn't there? Do you think sometimes it can be quite hard for fertility patients to actually admit even to themselves that their mental health is being affected by their experience?
Yeah, absolutely. I think being involved in the infertility journey, finding yourself on that road, can have a huge impact on your mental health. And I think there's a huge stigma and taboo still around, even though, you know, as a society, we're getting better and there's much more on social media and such. I still think it's very difficult for people to kind of admit where they are with their mental health.
And what kinds of things do you find fertility patients often experience?
Wow, everything. Anxiety, depression, panic attacks. A big thing that comes up is loneliness and isolation. They feel isolated. It impacts people, are impacted their whole sense of their selves, and they don't always recognize that this is related. So for example, if they're having panic attacks or anxiety, start to feel really sad and depressed, so it can really begin to impact on them. Sleeplessness, they might not be eating, or they might be overeating because of the emotional impact it's having on them.
And how common do you think it is for people going through fertility treatment to have some or to experience some of these things?
Personally, I think it's very common. Practically everybody I work with on a daily basis will be experiencing some of these things. I think even just walking through a fertility clinic, nobody ever expects to find themselves in a fertility clinic in the first place. And I'm just thinking, you know, even going to your GP and having some tests being done, blood tests or such things, anxiety starts to build even from then. So by the time you reach a fertility clinic and you've got more tests, the anxiety is starting to build, so that's starting to impact on your mental health. A survey was carried out by Fertility Network UK a few years ago, and actually in that survey, 90% of the people with fertility issues reported feeling depressed. So that's a huge amount of people.
What do you think it is about infertility that makes it have such a big impact on people?
Okay, so I think because it's very personal, and I think infertility or fertility, your fertility, a person's fertility, is something that's not really in your consciousness. You're not really conscious of until you decide you want to have a child. It's almost like it's unconscious because it's innate that, you know, as children, we imagine we'll grow up and we'll be able to have a baby, but we don't actually truly think about it, or most people don't truly think about it until they're in that position and have decided they want a child. And I think because it impacts on every aspect. So it impacts on how you feel about yourself, how you feel about your body, how you feel about your relationship with your partner, how you feel about your relationship with your parents, your siblings, your work colleagues. It absolutely engulfs your whole life. So I think that's why it has such a huge impact.
And do you find that there are some key points during the fertility journey that are really challenging for people?
So key parts of the treatment, do you mean?
Yeah.
Well, as I said, I think finding themselves in a fertility clinic in the first place is challenging. I mean, to be honest, it depends on the individual. Most people find it challenging to be in a fertility clinic in the first place. Coming to appointments can be challenging. The very thought that they might bump into somebody they know. in terms of the actual treatment process itself, one of the most distressing parts of treatment that people report on is actually the 2-week wait, which is the part after treatment whilst you're in the period waiting to find out if treatment has been successful. That has been classed as one of the most distressing parts of treatment.
And how can counselling help with these things?
So counselling's a safe place to kind of help explore some of the thoughts and emotions that are going on for an individual or a couple. Seeing the counsellor in the clinic or attached to the fertility clinic, a specialist fertility counsellor, is a really good idea, because as opposed to a generic counsellor, because a fertility counsellor has a whole picture of all of the fertility treatments and aspects of the journey. And it's a person's safe space to kind of explore where they're at, what they're finding challenging, how it's impacting on their mental health. It might be to do with communication with their partner, or communication with family members or work colleagues. So it can really help to explore and find new coping strategies for that individual person or couple.
And does every fertility clinic actually have a counsellor?
Not every clinic has a fertility counsellor. Most clinics do have a fertility clinic on site. Some counsellors are on site and some are remote. Every licensed clinic in the UK must be able to offer counselling. So some clinics will signpost you to their counsellor who's attached to their clinic.
And do people, the fact that the clinics have to offer it, does that mean that they have to include it in the price, or should people expect to pay for it separately? What normally happens?
I think this varies usually around the UK. Personally, I would like to see it included in the price with all licensed treatment centres. Thankfully, I work at a clinic where it is included in the price, and our counselling is very generous. Unfortunately, some clinics do only offer one session, and then patients would be expected to pay thereafter.
What's the difference between a fertility counsellor and a fertility coach? I think lots of people get a bit confused about who all these people are.
Oh dear. Well, it is a really good question. It is a really good question. I mean, coaching by its very nature kind of, that deals towards kind of development and working towards positive goals, whereas counselling will work on the emotions. So coaching, for example, doesn't necessarily, because it's focused on being the best person you can be and working towards positive goals, it won't necessarily focus on the traumatic events that are going on or have happened, whereas counselling is much more focused on a person's emotions and kind of working through those, processing them, coping them, and maybe even re-strategizing them, if that's even a word. So it's much more to do with feelings and coping with the anxiety and working through that anxiety, for example, rather than positive goal setting and developing oneself.
And when people are looking for a counsellor, what should they look for? Because we know that sometimes people come to your website, your Beaker website, to try to find a fertility counsellor before they've even perhaps gone to a clinic. So what should people be looking for? Because we know it is very much a sort of one-to-one relationship, really, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, in the first instance, I would always recommend that if somebody, you just said then before somebody's even gone to a clinic, if somebody is going to a clinic, to try and have a meeting with a counsellor in that clinic. The Beaker website does have a find a counsellor section. All the counsellors on that section are accredited or working towards their accreditation. And I would say that is one of the things that people should be looking for, an accredited specialist fertility counsellor. as opposed to a generic counsellor. And I think it's very much about working with a counsellor to see if you're a good fit or not. I always say you can't be everybody's cup of tea. And a person is coming to a counsellor, and to enable them to kind of share their innermost thoughts, which people do, it's their innermost thoughts, their fears, their anxieties.
Did you just freeze, Ange?
Sorry, it went off.
Oh, did it?
Yeah. Sorry.
That's okay. Do carry on. Just let's carry on. And
Sorry, it went off.
do you want me to like to ask you that question
Yeah, sorry.
again? So what should people look for in a counsellor?
So somebody they feel comfortable with, somebody they feel they can talk to. I do always think that you know, people can't always be a perfect match. So it might be a case that somebody needs to have a couple of sessions with different counsellors to find one they feel comfortable with. When a client is coming to a counsellor, and particularly fertility clients, you're sharing your most innermost thoughts with the counsellor, your kind of fears, your anxieties. So of course you need to feel comfortable with that counsellor to be able to really share how you're feeling. And if you don't feel comfortable with that counsellor, then you're not going to benefit from having that counselling.
Sometimes I think patients are a bit worried about seeing a counsellor because they think it might be seen as a sign of weakness, of them not coping in some way. And what would you say to anyone who's feeling that?
Yeah, I think that is very common. It's not a sign of weakness at all. I have this thing about cars. I always say we look after our cars every year. For some people, they take them for the 3 monthly service or whatever it is, but at least all of us take our car for an annual MOT. And I kind of think, what's the difference with your mental health? There's no weakness in seeing a counsellor. There's no weakness in struggling with fertility, struggling with your emotions. And this is kind of back to this stigma. And I think often men find it very difficult, more so than females, of accessing that support. But there's no stigma. And I think as well, clinic staff are very much aware as well that it's not a sign of weakness. I think some people, what I often hear, and I don't know if this is what you hear, Kate, is that if I ask to see the counsellor or if I make a referral to the counsellor, then the clinic will think I'm weak, or they won't think I'm ready for treatment, or I can't cope with treatment. And it's not at all like that. We're there to try and work for the patient's best interest and best emotional well-being. And if anything, a lot of the clinic staff see it as a good sign that they're accessing support and getting the support that people actually need.
So what actually happens in a counselling session?
Well, depending on the counselling. So if it's so counsellors in a fertility clinic, it might be implications counselling where they're having a particular type of treatment. But if it's like in terms of their emotional well-being, like we're talking about today, for me, I very much start with where the client is at and their space to kind of tell me what's going on for them currently, what's the most pressing issues for them, what history, what's been going on in the past for them, and what's going on in the future. And kind of, I mean, it's a really difficult question to answer, to be honest with you, Kate, because it very much depends on where the client is and what they want from that session. You know, it might be somebody who's come along, they want some coping strategies for talking to their parents, for example. or it might be somebody who's come along and they want some coping strategies to deal with panic attacks or relationship communication. Sorry.
No, that's fine. Sorry to interrupt. And I think another thing that patients sometimes worry about going to see a counsellor is about confidentiality, and whether you as a counsellor working in a clinic have to report back to the clinic what's said in a counselling session. So what's the situation with that?
Okay, so counselling is confidential. A counsellor should tell you at the beginning of your sessions together what the confidentiality is for that particular counsellor in that particular clinic. Usually all counselling is confidential, and unless there's a risk to the client or kind of the unborn child, if there's a significant risk, or if the counsellor's worried about you, usually the counsellor would discuss that with the patient before breaking any confidence. Some counsellors, it is confidential to the clinic team, but your counsellor would discuss that with you at the start.
So you would know if your counsellor was going to be talking about you with the rest of the team?
Yeah, and to be honest, I think if that is the situation in clinics, it's kind of core information that would be discussed, which the patient would know about. It's not walk out of the counselling room and Mrs. A said A, B, and C, and did you know? So it's not everything. And obviously that is really important, another important aspect for patients to be able to feel that they can talk to the counsellor without being judged, or that it's going to get back to the clinic team and they'll be afraid. Sometimes it's really useful for the clinic team to be aware of something what's been said in the counselling session. For example, somebody might have a phobia of needles, or there might have been past sexual abuse and has a phobia of scans, or particularly doesn't want a male medic scanning. And sometimes that is really useful for the counsellor to kind of be the go-between, if you like, to kind of feed that back to the team in a sensitive manner. But again, that would be done with the patient's consent.
Yeah, so it wouldn't be without them knowing. I wonder, is there anything people can do in advance to themselves to try to prevent the mental health issues that we know can arise with fertility?
Yeah, I think like anything with anything to do with mental health, kind of look after yourself as best as you can, your health, your diet, your sleep regime as much as possible. Be kind of get good sleep patterns, good healthy eating patterns, and support network around you as well. That is really, really important.
And what kind of things would you recommend that people do if they feel that their infertility is starting to have an impact on their mental health?
See the counsellor. Aside from seeing the counsellor, the top one for me is talking, communicating, which goes back to that very first question. I think it was the first question you asked me, just about the stigma and such, because it is really difficult to be open. But being able to communicate and share how you're feeling would give you an outlet and to start being able to process. Where, say for example, somebody having panic attacks, if they're not talking about those panic attacks and they're constantly getting into states of, they go out into town and then they have a panic attack, nobody's around or aware that that's happening to kind of help them and kind of discuss through some strategies they might adopt. So I would always encourage anybody to talk to their partner, talk to a close friend, seek counselling. Of course, there's lots of forums now, Fertility Network UK, that can really help with the sense of isolation, knowing that there are other patients out there that might not be feeling exactly the same, but the same sense of feelings, and they're not alone in this.
Are there any other kind of coping strategy type things that you might recommend? I mean, I know people often talk about journaling and those kind of things, and about doing yoga, or do you think those things can help, those sort of things? And which would you think are quite good ones for people to try if they are feeling quite, fragile or finding things tough?
I think it's very much an individual. It's different for each and every individual person. Some people like exercising, some people like yoga, like you said, some people like journaling, some people like meditating. All of these things are useful if they're useful to that person as an individual. So, for example, there is no point me asking somebody to meditate if they hate meditation, or to go to a yoga class, because they're not going to get no benefit. If they think it is useful for them, then it's worth doing. I think one of the top ones with my patients over the years has been journaling, but not in a prescribed fashion. So, for example, I always encourage patients to write down some of their thoughts that they have. They can write those in sentences, they can write those in paragraphs, or they can just do smiley faces or whatever they wish. It doesn't have to be prescriptive. And I think why I encourage some patients to do that is because, again, it's that outlet. Even though it's not verbally communicated, it's written down, it's coming out of their mind. They can always go back to that at a later date and try and balance that thought. This is what I thought then, and is that really true? And what's the balance in that thought process? So I think that's a useful tip.
And how long can people carry on seeing their fertility counsellor? I mean, would you recommend it after treatment's finished, whether it's successful or not?
I see a lot of people after they finished their treatment successfully. Again, that will vary from clinic to clinic and whether you're seeing your counsellor independently or not. Again, at the clinic I work at, we're very lucky and we can continue to see people. And again, if it's a benefit to the individual, if they feel it's a benefit, I often think it can be useful throughout the pregnancy, because you're on the next chapter of your journey, if you like. And although you come into this journey wanting to have a baby from it, once you've got your baby, there is an all new set of anxieties and stepping stones, as I call them, to get through. So it can be usually beneficial to continue to work with your counsellor through that time.
And what about for people who are leaving the clinic who haven't been successful, who might be looking to a future without children? I mean, how long can you carry on seeing the clinic counsellor in those circumstances?
Again, it would depend on the individual clinic and the individual relationship. Each clinic is different, so it's so difficult to be able to kind of give you a significant answer on that. Some of it comes down to the relationship between the counsellor and the patient, and kind of having that professional judgment as to when to end. Some people want to end and want to just get out of that fertility clinic. And some people kind of want to hang on to it as long as possible. But some people really want to do a therapeutic piece of work to kind of really end that chapter.
And can counselling do?
That's not a clear answer for you.
But it is. I mean, do you think counselling can help people to come to terms with that? I know we're not talking about specific clinics, but maybe even once they've gone out from the clinic and beyond, do you think that that can still be helpful in terms of kind of coming to terms with a different future?
Definitely, yeah, because that's exactly what it is. It's a different future to the one they imagined they were going to have. And so there's the whole process of the loss and grief. That's once somebody decides to have a baby, psychologically that baby is already present, but physically the baby is absent. So to reach the end of your treatment, your fertility journey without that baby, you've already imagined having that baby in your life. So there is people have to start to learn how to accept that into their lives, because that is part of their lives now. And, you know, 10 years down the road, that's not going to have changed. And it's about restructuring their lives. So it can be hugely beneficial to see the counsellor and start processing that loss and then restructuring their lives to the one they imagined they were going to have.
That's great. Thank you, Angela, and thank you for all your really helpful answers on this webinar. It's been really great to have yours and Beaker's support for our National Fertility Awareness Week. So thank you very much.
You're really welcome. Thank you for having us.